I never thought of myself as easily scared. I photograph forgotten places, abandoned ones, the kind that no one cares to see anymore. Here I am, in the middle of the desert, driving for hours on dusty dirt roads, searching for one of those places lost in time. It's an old military outpost, buried between dunes, that caught my attention. There's nothing nearby, no towns, no signs of life. Just sand, heat, and the sound of the wind scratching against rusty metal walls. The landscape was desolate, just how I like it to create a solid narrative for my followers. There it was, the old outpost, a few rusted buildings, a watchtower that looked ready to crumble, and machinery barely holding up under the weight of sand piled against it. The solitude was absolute, almost tangible, and the absence of any sign of life amplified a silence that felt strange. For a moment, it even felt like that silence was watching me. It was the perfect place for a photo shoot, but something about the atmosphere was starting to get to me. I'd noticed the quiet before, sure, but at sunset, it seemed to shift. The air grew denser, like it was charged with something unseen. The dim light of the sinking sun stretched the shadows long, wrapping the buildings in an even more ghostly gloom. As darkness took over, a weight settled within me, and the feeling of isolation that had once drawn me now began to feel stifling. It was as if the desert itself was watching me, waiting for something, or preparing me for something I couldn't understand. All around, the empty buildings seemed less harmless and more watchful. I tried to shrug it off, to convince myself it was just the silence and vastness messing with my mind. But at that moment, with the sky darkening, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I'd made a mistake coming here. On that first night, after setting up camp, I decided to explore the outpost. The moon was high, casting long, distorted shadows over the dunes, while the wind made the sand whisper through the empty corridors. My flashlight caught through the darkness, revealing details I hadn't noticed before: broken mirrors half buried in the sand, rusted military ration cans abandoned long ago, and strange symbols, almost like scars, scratched into the metal panels on the walls. I found the main building and entered cautiously. It was dark, and the silence inside was heavy, almost oppressive. After a few steps, I heard a crack behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. Still, an uneasy alertness crept up inside me. I decided to investigate further, hoping to find something, anything, that might explain what had happened here. Suddenly, a metallic sound froze me in place. I looked around, and, out of nowhere, an old, dusty radio, clearly without power, began to emit a distorted, faint sound. A voice emerged, broken and incomprehensible, as if someone was trying to say something. "Run, before, too late," was all I could make out, but the words sent a chill through me. The desert wind seemed to grow stronger, howling through the empty corridors. As I tried to step away from the radio, I heard footsteps in the sand outside. They weren't mine. They were slow, deliberate, almost calculated. I pointed the flashlight outside, but all I saw was emptiness, the oppressive silence of the desert, and the decaying buildings. My heart pounded as I turned, trying to find the source of the footsteps. Each time I heard them, they were closer. And yet, whenever I shone the light around me, there was nothing there. Just the echo of my breathing in the deep darkness of the outpost, as if the place itself was testing me, waiting for the next time I'd let my guard down. Dawn brought a faint, almost mystical light as I climbed the old watchtower to capture some photos of the desolate vastness around me. Everything was eerily silent, and the tranquility of the desert felt almost surreal, until I noticed something strange. Atop a distant dune, a lone figure stood, almost like a shadow cast against the pale sky. I froze, watching. The figure looked ethereal, dressed in a tattered uniform, worn by time, head bowed as if in mourning. My heart began to race, but I tried to steady myself. Maybe it was someone lost, perhaps a traveler. I took a deep breath and called out, but the figure didn't react. Instead, it slowly raised its head, revealing hollow, empty eyes that didn't seem to see, and yet somehow saw everything. It wasn't human, there was something disturbingly empty about it. Panicking, I hurried down the tower as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. When I looked back, hoping to catch another glimpse, there was no one there. The dune was empty, as if nothing had ever been there but sand and wind. A chill ran down my spine, colder than the desert at dawn. I was alone, and yet I wasn't. Something was here, something that belonged to this place, like a shadow from the past refusing to fade away. Driven by a need to understand what's happening, I started searching every corner of the outpost, determined to find something, anything, that could explain what I'd seen. In a small, decaying office, hidden beneath layers of dust, I found an old, weathered journal. The pages were yellow and brittle, but the words were still legible, scrawled in shaky handwriting by a guard stationed here decades ago. The entries painted a disturbing picture. This place had once been an experimental station, a remote post for testing survival endurance in the harshest conditions. The guards stationed here had spent long, isolated months under the blazing sun and unending silence of the desert. But according to the journal, many of them began experiencing strange symptoms, hallucinations, paranoia, whispers coming from the dunes at night. They wrote about the feeling of being watched, even when no one else was around. One entry stopped me cold. The guard described seeing shadows in the distance, figures he called fallen soldiers, wandering through the desert at dusk, just standing there, silent and still. And there was something else, something he mentioned about the watchtower. He claimed there was a presence there, watching over the outpost, a figure that seemed to haunt the tower and the land around it. As I read, a cold dread seeped into me, a sickening realization that the figure I'd seen matched the description from the journal perfectly. The hollow eyes, the tattered uniform, it was as if the guard had been warning anyone who found this place to stay away. But it was too late for that now. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I grabbed my gear, heart pounding, and set off toward my car, each step feeling heavier, like the sand was pulling me back. But just as I reached the car, I heard it, footsteps. Crunching in the sand, echoing my every move. My breath hitched, and I looked back. The figure was there again, closer this time, those hollow eyes fixed straight on me, following me. A gust of wind whipped up, swirling the sand into a towering wall around the outpost, trapping me inside. My stomach dropped. Shadows flickered between the buildings, more figures, just standing there, all with the same empty stare. They weren't here before, and now they seemed to be watching me, waiting for something. A chill ran down my spine as the reality sank in. This place wasn't just deserted. It was a prison, and the souls here were stuck. I stumbled to the car, fumbling with my keys, hands shaking. As I started the ignition, the whispers flooded in, low and relentless, like voices trapped in the wind, seeping into my thoughts. The sandstorm grew fiercer, obscuring everything around me. I floored the gas, tires spinning, but the voices didn't let up. And in the rearview mirror, through the haze of sand, I caught one last glimpse of the figure standing at the center of the outpost, arm raised, as if beckoning me to come back. I sped down that dirt road, but the whispers stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after I'd left the outpost. Their final message chilled me to the bone. You can't leave, we're part of you now.